Welcome to Healthy Minds. I'm Dr. Jeff Borenstein. Everyone is touched by psychiatric conditions, either themselves or a loved one. Do not suffer in silence. With help, there is hope. Today on Healthy Minds,
parents don't want to hear that their kid has a mental illness. They just do not. It's like, if they have a mental illness, then it's my fault. I did something.
if you notice that your child was walking with a limp, you would say, "What happened to your leg? Let me bring you to a doctor and let's fix it." If they are showing other signs that may be consistent with anxiety, depression, or some other psychiatric symptom, it's similar to walking with a limp. Get the help that they deserve. That's today on Healthy Minds. Healthy Minds is brought to you in part by the American Psychiatric Association Foundation, the Graham Beck Foundation, and the New York State Office of Mental Health. Welcome to Healthy Minds. I'm Dr. Jeff Borenstein. We all experience anxiety, but what should you do if you're concerned that your child is being overwhelmed by his or her anxiety? Anxiety is the most common psychiatric symptom in young people, and it's often overlooked. Today we speak with leaders in the field of youth anxiety about a new approach for treatment. Lisa Maria, Herb, thank you both for joining me today. Herb, outline why we're here today.
Well, we are fortunate in having a wonderful friend and colleague and supporter who's helping us bring to the attention of people how widespread the problem of anxiety disorders is, and also ways by which we can help both the people suffering and also the families who try to help. It's a complicated problem, but one which has gotten too little recognition.
Very important topic, and I agree hasn't received as much attention, and hopefully this is part of getting that attention. Lisa Maria, tell us how you became involved in this important issue.
And normally when someone asks me to get involved in something, I say, well, I need to think about it. This was a no-brainer, because I always thought if I was growing up and there was a program like this for me, I would have not had the anxiety I have had in my whole entire life, including as an adult. If I would have had the Youth Anxiety Center to help me understand the pressure and the anxiety that I had, I didn't have a voice growing up, that's what brings me here. I am proud to be part of this program, and for whatever I went through as a child and growing up, perhaps I could be a voice to young youth and parents to help them be a part of the Youth Anxiety Center.
I want to ask you, Lisa Maria, you've been open about your own experiences, and I'd like you to share what it's been like for you to have experienced anxiety and what's been helpful to you to help you deal with that.
Well, my experience had started, I've been, and I could say an adult at the age of 5, because I was a bartender at 5, you know, when my mom had people over, and it's usually on the weekends. So I learned how to not have a voice, and learned how to be smart enough to keep myself away from things. But my anxiety was really, really heavy, because the more they drank, the more anxious I got, because the more I projected what may happen. And the next day, the I'm sorry that my mother gave me the hope to continue to go on. I'm sorry, you know, I didn't mean to hit you, I didn't mean to hurt you, I didn't mean to say this to you, whatever it was. So I think what helped me is the hope that I had that my mother was going to change on a daily basis. What helped me as an adult, there was no Youth Anxiety Center. So I went to 12-step programs. I spoke in groups. I did whatever I could. I read self-help books. I wanted to get better. I knew I had a problem. I didn't know what my problem was. And my outbursts were really, really high. And when I was feeling insecure, and when I was feeling that something wasn't right, and I didn't, you know, my gut would tell me something wasn't right, I couldn't handle it, I was shut down. And as I got older, I did get therapy and help, which I am still. And it's helpful to go and speak to someone, including now that I have children. And what made me be a better parent is I learned what not to do because of the situation I grew up in. I think programs like, the program like this is so key.
You know what's remarkable is I've got that three-word line that you said, I was a bartender at 5. That says something very potent. That's what was happening in the family. Imagine all the other families with all kinds of other problems, and what has to be realized is whatever they do has an impact on their young people, their children. I want to say 2 things. One is that the anxiety disorder can be of various sorts. Sometimes it's young people who set such a high standard, or their parents set such a high standard, that there's no way nobody's going to realize it, but then they become so upset about it that they become less and less functional and riddled with anxiety. And the other thing I wanted to mention, which we've not talked about before, I had a relative of mine who, at about the age 13 or 14, lost his father. And he went from there into psychiatric problems, drugs, and he inflicted so many wounds on himself. He found a way to get himself blinded. He found a way of keeping out of work. And he finally passed away as almost a derelict, even though he came from a family, and it was tragic he lost his father, which was a reasonably decent family. So the problems can come from different families. They can manifest themselves in different ways.
I agree. It comes from not only low income, but it stems all the way up to high income, families as well.
That's a very important point, that these issues go across all economic, ethnic, and other kind of differentiation. This is unfortunately something that we all have to deal with, and it's important that people know that.
It stretches across the entire economic strata. So it was brought to me by friends from the fashion industry who said there's just a lot of teenagers and children of people we know who are running into trouble with no place to go. And that led to our starting there, and then we also wanted to be sure we were taking care of young people who didn't have resources. So we set up a clinic which would help people who were indigent or didn't have reinsurance and the like. And then we've set up different kinds of programs developing depending upon what they were, what state they were in. So we have some who maybe have a more moderate kind of anxiety, but some the anxiety gets so serious that we also have what's called a partial hospitalization program, in which people come during the day, sleep at home, but during the day, 5 days a week, they're with us.
So they have perhaps medication, talk therapy, group therapy, other types of treatment to bring them to a better level with regards to their anxiety or other issues.
Right. Well, our faculty are just terrific. They're dedicated, and they're really working at it as hard as we can. And now to have Lisa Maria help us in terms of getting the message out is just what we want. We may not be able to fix the world, but we want to start, and then we want to help other people to develop the skills. We'll help train people. We'll reach out to counselors. We'll reach out to schools. We'll go wherever we have to make the message. And I'll tell you one other thing. When I was director of NIMH, in retrospect, I realized even then we gave very little attention to anxiety disorders. Schizophrenia, depression, manic depression, those are important, but so is anxiety disorders.
And often the early symptoms of those disorders could be anxiety, and that could be a sign to nip it in the bud, take early intervention. As we finish up, I want to ask Lisa Maria to share your words of wisdom to somebody who's watching right now, who's concerned about their child.
It's a big problem, and it definitely can be addressed just as long as the parents see the warning signs as opposed to pointing the finger. Or even if the young adults are watching this now, to know that you can get out. you have the ability to walk in on your own or tell your parents, I actually want to go to the Youth Anxiety Center. One thing I do want to point out as well is fundraising for, and I know that you didn't want me to, no one ever told me to bring this up. Fundraising is the hardest thing for any mental illness. Why? No one wants to put their name on having, being part of any organization with mental illness. Oh, well, they may think I have it. They may think my kids have it. So it's a catch-22. So everybody has this stigma about it. If we could just open up and understand that the reality of it, the key is, like you said, in order for these kids to come in and afford it, let's do something about it.
You make such an important point. Because of stigma, and I refer to it as prejudice, it's more than stigma, it's prejudice. People hesitate to come forward either for treatment or for their loved one to get treatment or philanthropically to support certain causes that are very useful. People hesitate, and we all pay a price for that because everybody is affected by this. Everybody has somebody in their life, either they themselves or a close loved one, affected by one of these conditions.
The numbers are astonishing.
Yeah.
They're enormous.
Very important points, very important. Lisa Maria, Herb, I want to thank both of you for the work that you're doing in support of youth. So thank you both.
Thank you.
I now speak with two leading experts, Dr. Anne Marie Albano and Dr. Francis Lee. They share important information about the diagnosis and treatment of anxiety in children, adolescents, and young adults. Anne Marie, Francis, thank you both for joining us today. I want to jump in and first of all ask about the scope of the issue of youth anxiety. How many people are affected by this?
Well, it's a staggering statistic, actually, that for youth, and when we say youth, we're talking about really 17 to 28 years of age, about 30% of American youth are struggling with an anxiety disorder in any given year.
Substantial number of people.
Yes. And so when you think about it, 1 in 5 children in a school, elementary or high school, 1 in 5 are going to have an anxiety disorder.
What do you attribute this to?
Well, that's the question that parents come in with. Why is my child like this? What have we done wrong? Where did this come from? And the answer is it's complicated because it's a mix of genetics and family history. The child's temperament can set the stage, so the infant personality and early personality. And then as a child's developing, the way that they start looking at and interpreting the world, so the cognitive style of being glass half empty instead of glass half full, and I can't instead of I can, that coupled with other factors such as parenting. Anxiety brings out of parents the reaction of protect, comfort, over control. And what happens over time is the more they do that, it helps in the moment, but in the longer term, the child then doesn't start doing things for themselves. So it's a whole mix of biological, genetic, temperamental, and then environmental factors.
So one of the important issues, if somebody is coming for treatment, is what to do now, given that they may have anxiety. And then another issue is for parents with young kids now, what can they do to decrease the risk of anxiety, to encourage resilience to that?
The first thing we do when a parent comes in, and what I want to say is this is not just for 3 to 7-year-olds, but as well as for our youth who are teenagers and young adults, especially young adults who have failed to get out of the home and make it into college or into the workforce. They're staying home. They're afraid of the world.
And we know that even young adult brains are still growing and developing. A brain doesn't stop developing at the teenage years or even early adulthood, but the brain is still developing into young adulthood.
That's exactly right. So what we understand now is the brain is doing its pruning and it's consolidating all the way through age 25. And what's happening at this point is that the young adults are failing to launch because of anxiety. Well, what we do with parents and with our kids and young adults is we sit down and we say, okay, look, let's take a look at how things go. When it comes to getting out of the house and going to school, calling up a friend, dealing with an embarrassing situation, how do you react to the child or the young adult? What do you do? And we're watching for what the parents do. Then what do you do, mom or dad? And how does this go back and forth in an interaction? And so what we're looking for are patterns that have happened over time. One, the pattern within the youth themselves, how they responded and how they react to the environment, but the other to where the parent comes in and what they do, because we have to uncouple that. And we have to help whatever age, whether they're 3 or 23, we have to say for this age, what should be typical in terms of things that kids do, then what are things that produce anxiety that we could give you special ways of coping with that, but it's got to be independent on them, and so we have to help parents to step aside.
But what you're actually saying is that if someone comes in to your clinic, the first thing you say is that please come back.
Yes.
Because what it is, it cannot just be the parent's burden. It's actually that you need a professional to work with you to basically work on how to cope with these these symptoms. Because the easiest way to diminish anxiety is to avoid things, to stay in your room, and you need the therapist to help you actually, and the parents to learn how to confront your anxiety and work with it. So I think that's one thing. The second thing, getting back to what you were saying about the developing brain, at any moment, getting help, it will be helpful, whether it be the age of 4 or 24, because essentially at each moment, the brain is developing in a very patterned way, and any type of intervention will be helpful. What Anne-Marie and I are working together on is that at each stage, we might have to tailor the treatment for it in a very personalized way. In a way, this is sort of precision medicine, but not using genetics, but using the developmental trajectory of the brain and of the family setting, and so that at each stage there are different ones.
So one of the points you're making is that what would seem natural, which is to avoid the anxiety-provoking situation, so don't be anxious, is not necessarily the best course of action. And with guidance, with professional assistance, you actually want to help the youth and help the family encourage the young person to face some of those anxiety-provoking situations. I want to ask you a little bit more about that.
Yes. So let me say this. We have observed, think about the situation of a 5-year-old who comes running out of school in the afternoon. The parent is standing there and the tears are flowing out of this child. What happened? I wasn't allowed to sit with Amy and Sandy at the lunch table. They didn't want me there. It breaks your heart to see your child. So mom or dad swoops in, they go and find Amy and Sandy, try to make better, and it's the parent who's facilitating that. They might call the teacher. Totally appropriate when it happens once or twice. What happens though, and that's a typical scenario, what happens though is with children who are anxious, this is happening again and again. And we actually know that about 9% of preschoolers have undiagnosed anxiety disorders. This was found in a study of pediatrics clinics. So this is happening from early on. The anxiety is shaping the parenting. So the minute the parent fixes the situation, the child feels better, the parent feels relief too, but it is again and again. And this goes all the way through into adulthood. Okay? Whether it's filling out your child's applications for college, you call and arrange the internship, you're arguing with the high school teacher of the grades, and in the Chronicle of Higher Education, there's plenty of articles about professors and deans of medical schools getting calls from parents.
And the parents.
Okay? So, but it's a process that happens. We're not blaming parents because you want your children to be okay. But that leads to avoidance of the child learning how to manage. And so we came up with a model for what we call, it's a cognitive behavioral contextual, which Francis will talk more about, and developmental model that we call LEAP, Launching Emerging Adolescents and Adults, where we're working with the family system. We're giving skills to the youth, across the ages actually, skills to the youth that are age appropriate, but also to the parents, to recognize when their own amygdalas light up because they're anxious about their child's anxiety, and helping them to step back and to be good coaches for the child to take on situations for themselves.
And what are you finding from a research standpoint?
What we have found is that during this period of the transition from childhood to adolescence to adulthood, previously brain research had made the assumption that the brain was just growing linearly, that you're just essentially getting a bigger and bigger brain. What we've really come to learn is that the brain develops at different rates at different periods of time, almost as if you have waterfall cascades. And there's what we would call like a critical period during childhood where certain things happen. And then what we found most recently is that there's a critical period during adolescence. So in essence, the brain is rearranging itself during childhood and also during adolescence. And you want to be aware of these things as you're thinking of various interventions, such as the ones that Anne-Marie is talking about. Because essentially, which makes, if you step back, it's sort of intuitive that the brain is obviously, a child brain is different than an adolescent brain, but we never understood how it was different. And what we have found most recently is that that the adolescent brain seems to be far more plastic or able to learn and adapt to new things than we previously thought. And there was this one brain region that we have found using modern sort of neuroimaging techniques in both humans and in rodents, that the hippocampus seems to be expanding and growing and reconnecting in ways. And this is really probably one of the biggest discoveries my lab and the labs that have been supported by the Youth Anxiety Center has made, because it suggests that we can do things that will possibly tap the hippocampus and make, and not only to make the hippocampus learn more things, but in the context of anxiety disorders, we could use it in some way to help treat anxiety disorders. And I think one of the ideas we have is that the adolescent brain is able to essentially compute context or the surroundings in a way. So normally we think of the hippocampus as a region that's involved in spatial memory. But what we found is that essentially the adolescent hippocampus can figure out very quickly whether or not a scenario is dangerous or safe. And it seems to be able to compute it in a way that is quite more rapid than an adult brain, for example.
To me, a key point that you're making is that in an adolescent, their brain is still changing, which is very useful and important and hopeful, because the treatment isn't just sort of treating a symptom, but the treatment can help the brain, as it's developing, develop in a healthier way. So it's almost like building new muscles. You're building new muscles in the brain so that the adolescent can be more healthy.
Exactly. That in essence, the adolescent brain is one that has the opportunity for even greater repair or greater capacity to overcome many things, which we didn't know before. I think that's the take-home message. Because we always knew, but it also coincides with what I think we've discussed, what Anne-Marie just brought up, that there seems to be a peak of incidence of anxiety disorders and other mood disorders in adolescence. So it seems like a paradox that you have this incredibly plastic and capable brain that seems to also be vulnerable to various mental disorders. And the idea is that as you are developed, if you have the capacity to learn, you also have the capacity to be more vulnerable to disorders. But what I think the upside is that you have the capacity also to treat the disorders in a more effective way. Essentially, you have a period of heightened sensitivity, but also of heightened vulnerability. And that's why if an adolescent shows up at a clinic, that treatment sooner than later will probably be most helpful.
So don't just say, oh, it's just a phase, don't worry about it. It's something to look at. And with treatment, people get better.
To use another example, in medicine, if a child shows up to the clinic having sort of not perfect binocular vision, the ophthalmologist knows that they have a period of time up until the age of probably 8 where they can do some type of reparative treatment to make sure they have perfect binocular vision to treat the amblyopia. And this is what we're thinking, that there is a critical period, not only for vision, but there's a critical period for emotional regulation that occurs during adolescence. And we think that that's why you would not wait until adulthood to correct binocular vision. You should not wait until adulthood to treat an anxiety disorder.
Join me next time as we continue our conversation with Dr. Albano and Dr. Lee and discuss specific symptoms and behaviors that can help parents determine if their child may need help with their anxiety. Remember, with help, there is hope. Until next time, I'm Dr. Jeff Borenstein. Do not suffer in silence. With help, there is hope. Healthy Minds is brought to you in part by the American Psychiatric Association Foundation, the Graham Beck Foundation, and the New York State Office of Mental Health. If you would like to watch our expert interview in its entirety, log on to bbrfoundation.org/healthyminds.